with some of you. And, you know, because the last thing that I want to do is be part of a system that's gatekept in the past. And I'm not talking philanthropy generally, but the country has historically kind of withheld resources from the folks that need it the most, and also the folks that happen to be the most innovative and creative. So I'm really excited to be part of, or be in this role in 2023 and kind of change some of those things. Sophia didn't share in my bio that I am a Sagittarius, so I'm a pretty direct communicator. I work really hard to be approachable. I know one of the things that when I became a program officer, I started going to conferences and, you know, had the foundation and my title on name tags, and then people would just stop talking whenever I walked up, in which I completely understand. I was in a grantee role for 10 years. And it would be very sad because, as you will quickly or have already been able to tell, I like to talk and connect with people. I'm going to pop some questions and food for thought before I jump into my presentation about things that I want to hear from you after. Feel free to pop questions in the chat continuously, or like Sophia said, if you're shy, you can send them to her on the side, and then she can make sure that they get addressed during our time together. But one of the things that I'm really curious about is, because we can't be everywhere at once. In fact, we're based in Los Angeles, California, so I'm rather far away from some of you. So I'm really curious about your perspective on what you all think funders are missing, or what are people missing who can't be in the day-to-day with you that, you know, you would really like to be elevated, or at the very least seen, would be really helpful for me to hear. Some people have just gone straight to the point and said, why do funders like toolkits so much? Luckily, I was like 2 weeks on the job at that point, so I didn't have a good answer for them. But if you have questions like that, again, feel free to log them my way. I will try to answer anything and everything that I possibly can. And if you haven't gotten, I'm just giving myself some time to get my slide deck up here. If you haven't gotten a chance to introduce yourself in the chat, please do. And thank you to those who indulged my Mean Girls reference. I promise that's the only one that I have for this particular presentation. Oh man. Give me 1 second. I have 3 screens going here. I want to see all of you in the chat, and then I want to be able to navigate. Here we go. Oh no, I can't see the chat box anymore. Oh well. We'll figure it out. Sophia, maybe you can just pop in and read things from the chat when read like questions from the chat. Is that okay?
I definitely will.
Okay. Can you all see this lovely green and blue screen?
Okay. Yes, I can see it.
All right. So our mission is around improving higher education for career success among underrepresented populations through evidence-based innovation. We are a higher ed and post-secondary funder exclusively, with an exclusive focus on persistence and completion. A few years ago, the ECMC Foundation made a decision to shift from college transitions, recruitment, even pathways, dare I say it, to really focusing on persistence and completion, because while they were seeing strides and gains made in college enrollment, we weren't seeing that same representation in those gains walk across the graduation line. I realize I don't have a slide to Miss Alana's question. ECMC Foundation stands for Education Credit Management Corporation, and we are the foundation entity that's connected to ECMC Group, which is based in Minneapolis. So that's kind of who we collaborate with, and we have all a shared mission around supporting students in higher education. But we've been around for about 8 years now, and like I said, based in Los Angeles, California. We provide support to the entire field, and we'll be mainly talking about post-secondary CTE today. But we provide support through strategic grant making, which we'll be talking about today. But this slide also highlights the fact that we have a program-related investments department, which really allows us to invest in educational technology solutions. Sorry, is there a question?
Oh, go on.
It allows us to invest in a range of educational solutions. There are, and they span all across the post-secondary spectrum. There are some folks with transfer applications. There are some that help match, we've invested in platforms that help match people to internships, things like that. So those are some examples of our investments in for-profit companies. Note that I'm not saying we're giving grant support to them. So investments, these are things that, depending on the arrangement, they have to pay back, etc. This was a completely new area for me when I started the foundation. Please don't ask me any hard questions. Sophie, I see the chat kind of popping up. I don't know if those are introductions or if they're questions, but once again, stop me whenever there's a follow-up question.
I will.
Okay, fabulous. This slide is to emphasize that we do not discriminate in terms of states. We're excited to invest in all 50 states in our union. You will see the dark turquoise on New Hampshire. I really want to be the one who makes the New Hampshire grant. So if you are, hopefully if there's any New Hampshireans, I don't even know if I said that right, on the call, please let me know and maybe we can have a conversation. Let me be clear, New Hampshire is not a bigger priority than any of the states that you're in. I just wanted to say that there's not an excuse or a reason why we have not funded in New Hampshire. So you'll see that, the numbers kind of range according to state. I just wanted to take a moment to emphasize that we don't have a state focus, and we get that question a lot. We focus on, implementation, but we do try, we have internal conversations like, hey, we've made X amount of grants to Colorado in the past few months. Like maybe we should really be mindful of other states, obviously. So we are a national funder. We recently went through a strategic framework refresh. So this is rather new. And when I was looking at the introductions and the names and faces on this call, I did see a lot of familiar faces. I saw a lot of people in our CTE Leadership Collaborative Fellows Program. And I say that because many of you were introduced or onboarded into the Foundation's programs under the previous framework. So this is an opportunity to talk about the new strategic framework. But as my mother says, I shouldn't make this all about me. So let me take a step back in terms of how to use this particular information. And the only other thing I have to say about that is every single funder or philanthropic entity has a different approach to grant making. And for me, when I was a grantee, admittedly, I wasn't in a lot of conversations with program officers, but I wouldn't have led with asking questions about their overall framework, which is a slightly different question than asking about their goals. Asking about someone's funding framework can give you the answers in terms of kind of where are the sides of the box, where do initiatives start and end for them. And we're going to get into parameters, at least as they pertain to post-secondary CTE, a little bit later. But I just wanted to take a step back and mention that about strategic frameworks. Maybe people don't call it, by people I mean other funders don't call it strategic framework, but everyone has something like this, which is a skeleton to kind of help them make decisions, basically, and frame up the conversations that they have both internally but also externally with grantees. So at the top of our strategic framework, you're seeing our overall mission that I already mentioned. Each grant that we're going to make moving forward is going to do one of the three strategic priorities. And I say one of because there is not an expectation for each grant to hit on all three of these. Removing barriers to post-secondary completion, building the capacity of institutions, systems, and organizations, and transforming the post-secondary ecosystem. The way that I kind of simplify it in my mind is, we recognize that innovation and systemic change can happen on the ground, in between the ground and the atmosphere, and at the high level. So we recognize kind of the need for innovation, disruption, intervention, much more broadly. And we know that progress can be made on multiple levels. So eventually, one day in the future, to be determined, definitely not this year, all of our grant making will happen attached to specific initiatives. Some of our initiatives are already established. Some of you are familiar with the CTE Leadership Collaborative. That's one established initiative. Other established initiatives that we have at the foundation are around basic needs. They are around catalyzing transfer, single mothers, and our latest one is the Men of Color initiative as well. Let me take a look here. Oh man, I just jumped ahead. Well, here they are. And the best news for me is, once again, making it about me, is that I got all 5 of our established initiatives correct. But this slide is a good way of saying, and I'm going to be honest, there's not enough green bubbles on the side here. There should be a few more, but there are initiatives under development. We do have a few ideas on what those are going to be, but nothing has been confirmed yet. And I'll talk about kind of the levels of confirmation, how decision-making happens at the foundation in a little bit. So one of the biggest, I'm going to actually move back a slide here, if I can, if my computer lets me. I'm going to say this, and one of the concerns, because I came in under our previous framework, which I don't want to talk too much about to confuse anyone, but post-secondary CTE was called out a little bit more meaningfully and a little bit more boldly. One of the concerns that our team had as we transitioned to this new framework is, are we going to signal to the field that post-secondary CTE continues to be a priority for us? So here it is. Here's the signal. I have nothing fancy, but please tell your friends, or friends and colleagues in the field. We are still very focused on post-secondary CTE. Why? Because we know that, for credit-bearing post-secondary CTE programs, whether it's at the certificate level, associate degree level, apprenticeship, anything in between, leads to long-term economic mobility, but more importantly, advancement. So one thing that I appreciate about the strategic framework is it took away our separation between like our 2-year team and our 4-year team. And now we're having conversations that are much more reflective of the post-secondary system that we would like to build, which is a system that has on-ramps, off-ramps, all leading to economic mobility, but really flexible in terms of meeting the learner's needs. But when we start talking more holistically, comprehensively, overall, then we lose some of that specificity, being able to call it things like post-secondary CTE. So we're still working, honestly, internally in our communications department about how to make sure that we're signaling all of these things at once. A lot of people talk about higher education and they don't include apprenticeships, post-secondary CTE in that definition. We do. I think you all get the point. I don't want to take up too much time. So this is something that we haven't necessarily talked about publicly. We've talked about systemic change, but I'm going to share something with you all. So we recently did, and eventually this will be public in a report, we did an analysis of who's getting grants. Are leaders of color and organizations led by people of color and women getting as many grants? The shorter answer is we have room to grow and expand in this area and become much stronger. One of the main reasons that folks were not getting grants, in addition to maybe not knowing our strategic framework as well, which again is completely fine, and our priorities, because it's hard to kind of, I understand how hard it is to kind of initiate conversations and get connected with funders, but a lot of the grants were focused on the day-to-day and not on the systemic change piece. So there's two, I'm probably going to say something different on every slide. Well, there's one thing that we look at in grants. On this side, it happens to be two main things. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things that we're thinking about when we're intaking your proposals. But two things here. One, yes, we want to make sure that it's impacting systemic change. We recognize that this can happen at various levels and at various stages of a project. But the second thing that's really important for us, of course, I lost my train of thought, is making sure that our grant support supports or positions the organization or the project for long-term success. I heard a couple comments earlier around being able to sustain positions and things like that. So we do ask questions about, you know, will this position the project to scale even further, ideally without our support, after we fund this particular project. So that's something that we're looking at. And as I kind of read through a lot of different LOIs, letters of inquiry that are coming in through the field, some get ahead of that question and some don't. Just to clarify, are we asking for, oh my gosh, I have this perfectly baked out sustainability plan, my I's are dotted, my T's are crossed? No. But we do want to know that you are thinking about it. We do want to know that you've already had conversations about who could potentially support this. So kind of at least have a skeleton for that. And I know that's somewhat of a nebulous answer, but I do want to just, I don't want to say, hey, if you don't have a perfect, shiny sustainability plan, you can't apply to us. But that is something that we are definitely looking for to be hinted at. Any questions? I see the chat increasing a little bit, and I'm switching gears a little bit from our grant making. I promise I'll leave time for a lot of questions at the end too. All right, you all are letting me off easy. The CTE Leadership Collaborative, one is a initiative, one of our, it could have been our first initiative. I really should know this, but I'm looking at Michelle for help. But it was one of the first initiatives at ECMC Foundation. as you all know, because you're in the CTE space, one of the largest and most persistent challenges that we have is this issue around silos. The employers aren't talking to the community colleges. The researchers aren't talking to the policymakers when programs are going well. But we don't have enough data to track it whatsoever, even if we do have a lot. I shouldn't even say even if, when we do have a lot of successes in our wonderful programs. This collaborative brings together folks who are on the rise in each of these really important segments, including the post-secondary CTE state leaders, and starts to remedy, demystify the different, remedy and demystify kind of some of the different segments that are happening, that exist in post-secondary CTE. We are now, this is a slightly dated slide, we are now at about 300 fellows, which is really exciting. We have annual convenings and mini grant programs. But again, it's really an opportunity for us at the foundation to understand what does meaningful, sustained collaboration look like, and organic, I think, is really important. So how do you initiate those conversations when you have limited context, in a different field? And I really appreciate the fellows who are part of this call today. Okay, back to grant making structure. This is a definition that is exclusive to the foundation. I'm not saying we are the only foundation who takes this approach, but I am saying that other foundations may have a different definition of CTE or of workforce credentials. We have pretty, I don't want to call them pretty strict parameters, but they're very defined. Let's just put it that way. So we don't do short-term credentials like 6 weeks and boot camps, and especially not credit bearing. We want to make sure that at the end of the program's completion, persistence and completion, a student is attaining a credit bearing academic credential, whether it's a certificate, associate degree, completed a registered apprenticeship. And then the second piece that's really important for us is that that you're positioning the student, the individual, the adult learner, for family sustaining wages. This is something I could rant on and wax on and off about all day. I've seen, and as Sophia mentioned, I've been at the kind of intersection of education and workforce, and Frank, I see your hand, my entire career thus far. I've seen a lot of people say things like, oh, we're going to help this person get a job. And then that job is like 50 cents above minimum wage, and it has no economic mobility. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but when I'm scanning through the LOI and reviewing kind of these opportunities, I'm really looking for placing students in positions that have long-term economic mobility and advancement without the need for a master's degree to get that manager position or a bachelor's. I understand upskilling, I understand continuing education here and there. It's important to keep us all fresh and sharp, but there's a lot of discussion about what equity truly looks like, and Sophia and I have this conversation quite a bit. So I'm really looking for to underrepresented communities on a path to where they are succeeding at the same rate as some of the wealthiest folks in this country. Frank, go ahead.
First, I want to unmute. I thought maybe Sophia just blocked me, which would be a wise move on her part. First is a quick question on the short-term certificates. This could be several years down the road, but do you think ECMC would revisit that current stance if short-term certificates become Pell eligible? which is certainly part of the current conversation, right? So these shorter term certs currently aren't, which would make sense for you guys not to fund that. But if that shifts, do you think ECMC would revisit that stance?
That's a great question. I don't see short-term Pell advancing being that push for the foundation. What I do see as being a push for that change is if there is research that shows that there are astronomical wage gains and long-term economic mobility, for learners from our priority communities once they get these short-term certs.
Yeah.
Obviously, we would have to wait for the study that is completed after a few years. But I think that's what we would be looking at, because right now, the data still is really making that case for more education is better. There's questionable outcomes about the really micro credentials, especially across communities.
I'm fully in support of the being very careful around micro credentials, and I agree. I think if short-term Pell is approved, it will take a couple years for real information to be available based on use. The other is totally agree. As you know, we've talked about this as well, in making sure we are not just creating fodder for capitalism, but we are actually putting people on a path to a family and individual, not just surviving or thriving, or sustaining, but truly increased economic participation. Are you giving any thought or consideration to looking at skills-based progression, not just sector-based, right? So someone enters a field that may have limited upward mobility within that sector, but the skills they gain in that first or second job actually position them to move into another industry sector, maybe even without additional training, that would be a more sustainable, family sustaining wage. So that cross-sector skills-based pathways, in addition to, the LMI says if you're a housekeeper, you've got to become a supervisor or a general manager, whereas maybe you're a housekeeper, you become a customer service rep in another industry.
I think that's a good point. And what I would say to that is 100% agree that we need transferable skills. However, and I was listening to I think it was a JFF webinar on, supporting individuals returning from incarceration. And they were explaining that some of these folks who had worked in kitchens or were working in kitchens, as an example, they had overseen, I think it was like hundreds of cooks at a time, these massive projects, but they only thought that they were eligible for much smaller kind of employment scopes. So what I would say to that is what we're looking for is making sure that the support services are happening, because it doesn't matter what skills someone has necessarily unless they know that they would be welcome in other sectors, unless they know how to transfer and kind of initiate career development agency within themselves. So we understand, and it is important, ideally to have a skill set that's transferable across skills. It's really important to have the support services there to make sure that can happen. And one of my dreams long term is for, and you all on the call can give me feedback on this if I'm crazy, but really for community colleges, because they don't have enough on their plates, to really think through how to support folks through the hiring process. Hey, I graduated 2 years ago. I got laid off. Can I come back, get a quick scan of my resume? Do you have any opening? Having that long-term relationship and kind of that overall system of support that's long-term, just because of that community central location. Any other questions before I keep us moving? I want to make sure I have time for a lot of other questions too. Thank you, Frank. Those were great. Okay, I'll keep going until someone says stop. And by the way, what Frank did by raising his hand, that was really great because he just pops to the front of my screen, and I was able to see that question come through loud and clear. Another question when engaging with funders, and this was very confusing for me when I started, was, what types of organizations do you fund? You might read someone's mission statement and say, oh, they're a high-end funder, they fund colleges. Well, what I've been told and what we say pretty often is that typically we don't fund the institution directly because our board is very much prioritizing scale and innovation, whether it's across multiple campuses or across multiple geographies. And I really want to harp on this because it could be that we are presented with a letter of inquiry that hits on persistence and completion, systemic change, etc., but it doesn't have a scaling piece, or it's just being offered at a singular institution, and then we have to pass on it. So that's why I kind of share that. These are a couple of different examples of organizations that we do fund, or how or why. Pilots are probably more likely to be funded at the individual institution level. But once again, with our strategic framework, our growth and resources, we expect to be making bigger grants. And of course, it would be harder to justify a massive grant to a singular institution. Organizations that we more typically fund are intermediaries that are working across multiple institutions and geographies and segments, ideally. Especially if folks, have done a pilot or done past work and they want to use our grant to leverage and expand and take their work to the next level. That's where we see most of our grant making. I'm going to kind of skip the last bullet because sometimes we fund research, a lot of the time we don't necessarily, unless it's applied in the field, delivering a really brand new insight that we're looking for. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying it's less likely. But that was something that was kind of shared by our previous president as well. So maybe things will change. I already touched on this, but just to share, once again, the things that are out of scope for us, anything that touches K-12, anything that's college access. In addition to that, internship stipends, capital projects are things that we can't fund overall. But that's kind of that in a nutshell. All right. This is one of the things that I hope will be, and I want people to ask questions. Sophia, are there any questions on the things I just covered? Because I see the chat going.
Not yet. Folks are very interested in getting this slide. So I'm going to make sure when I post the recording, I can get this slide and post for them. I also put up on here on the ECMC Foundation site, they have a frequently asked questions type of area. So I just put that up too, because you did mention, that people have these common questions. Mm-hmm. So I think that also highlights a couple of other questions just in case they had it, but folks just want to have access.
All right, you got it. I made this slide from scratch because I wanted to share a little bit about who makes what decisions, at least at our foundation. Once again, this can change between foundations, but I really want you to focus on that middle green bubble, like that my favorite Jolly Rancher, which is the board of directors. They're the ones who
one second, Anna, before you go, there is a question before we get to this part. So there's a funding question. If we have groups who run apprenticeship programs across the state at different institutions and locations, would they be eligible for funding? It would be one organization, but working with multiple institutions.
Yes, that's exactly the types of the types of things that we fund.
An intermediary?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm sharing this because I'm going to be honest and go back to my previous position. I was a senior program director at a small consulting firm, and obviously we would be talking to funders about potential projects. And most of the time it wouldn't fit exactly, but it would be like a fit for their mission, or it would be, I would say, like a 65 to 80% fit. And we're like, well, they'll overlook the fact that it doesn't fit exactly, but it fits mostly. And this is kind of a mindset that we have in organization, at our organization, but I see it a lot in the field. It doesn't fit the parameters that I was sharing around persistence and completion. Credit bearing is kind of a big one that people get hopped up on. Priority communities, the scale, and like I said, it could fit perfectly, but we still don't think the timing is right. We can't move it forward, and that's not because of the program officer. It's and it's not necessarily, you know, because of the board in real time, but they had kind of put their blessing and approval on this particular framework, and this is where it stands. The president's role is to really steward this work happening. He may identify other priority areas. So I listed off some of the initiatives earlier. You know, he may say, you know, I really want to focus on, you know, healthcare apprenticeships or something like that, which he could, and that has not been a conversation, so please don't spread that rumor, even though talk to me about healthcare apprenticeships for sure. It's still within the overall parameters and the framework that I've set around higher education, persistence and completion, et cetera. I hope that makes sense. I know that didn't come out perfectly articulate. The program officers are the folks whose job it is to seek alignment. And so when we're having a conversation, when we get a letter of inquiry, we are actively looking for alignment because it is our job to move grants through to approval. So if we see a fit, we will move it through. And one of my favorite parts about working for this foundation, and I'm not being paid to say this, in comparison to other foundations that I work with, I'm not going to name any names. If we get an LOI that's not well written or something like that, that doesn't matter. We're not looking for perfect. We want to know that what work is happening. You don't necessarily have to impress or dazzle us. How does the work that you're doing connect with our strategic priorities is really the question. And we'll be looking for that same alignment as well.
And before you go ahead, Anna, and I think that's important to highlight because as you know, as you're applying for funding and different things, a lot of organizations you submit, you don't hear back from, or you have to do this whole big grant and you don't hear back. I feel ECMC is very transparent in that they have this LOI process. And I just put it in how to apply in the chat, and you submit an LOI and you get feedback. You know, it's not just a no, and maybe Anna can talk a little bit more to that, but they're not going to make you go through this whole big, long, drawn out thing if they don't see the alignment. And I think that that's commendable because I know I've been on that side where I've submitted huge and it's taking forever just for them to say, nope. And that's you know, that doesn't really take into account the work you're doing and all of that. So I just put that in there.
Yeah, we try to be very detailed when we do have the declines. And I will say this, like when you get a decline from a program officer across any foundation, don't take it as a no and the door is locked shut. Take it as a not right now. Feel free to ask follow-up questions about particular reasons they didn't see alignment. But I could go on about that. It looks like I overtalked again. I'm pretty much done. We can open for questions, or I can go through our funding process very quickly, I promise.
Yes,
that
please.
Thumbs up from Frank. But again, continue to put your questions in the chat. We accept letters of inquiry on a rolling basis. And specifically, we have an open LOI process, which means that if you click on the link that Sophia put in the chat about how to apply, anyone can submit. Now, if we don't see alignment, after having a conversation with you, typically, we ask that you wait 6 months before submitting another one. But in theory, you don't even have to know a program officer or anything like that. And another thing that I like about the foundation, everyone's proposals are reviewed the same way. It doesn't matter if Sophia knows me already and she submits something, it does not go through a different process. After that, we have, so if there was an LOI assigned to me, I have to do my due diligence. I have to kind of look on your website, look at your past work. There's a high likelihood that I'll jump on the phone with you or the organization to make sure I'm fully understanding all of the questions that I may be asked and fully understanding how the program works. Once I get the green light and a thumbs up from everybody on my team, then we will move you to the proposal phase where we figure out all the details. How is this going to be measured? Can I see your Form 990? All that fun stuff. And then it goes to either the board or the executive committee of the board. So our board meets on a quarterly basis. And that's it. A lot of people reach out to me ahead of time. I will say this year I've been really bad at reviewing concept papers. Usually I'm not so bad about it. But whenever we get a concept paper with 5 or 6 different concepts within it, and I have to look at each concept and analyze it to see which one has alignment, that can take a while. And so if you have a concept that you think aligns, I would just put it in the letter of inquiry form so it can get processed a little bit more quickly. But some people do send us concept papers, but I will say that the best option to start that conversation is through the LOI process. With our 4 minutes left, and I have a couple minutes to stay over, but I know that everyone's time is limited. I saw Natasha unmute, and in the meantime, I will put my email address.
I was going to ask you to put your email address in the chat. So.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think there's a question asked, what are some examples of the type of initiatives that have been funded? And I'll try to skip through quickly because I know on the ECMC Foundation website, there is a list of funded projects, right, Anna?
Yes, there is. And you can search by keyword and things like that.
So it has it on the site. I think there's 3 more minutes. So Anna has she gave us her email. So we want to, for those of us working on mini grants, will ECMC be funding a 2023 round?
Yes, they will be. Okay, I'm not sure when the ETA is.
Okay.
So yes, we plan to. Go ahead.
Thank you. So Anna, I want to express my gratitude for you coming on today and speaking about ECMC, but also speaking about the process, what you guys are focused on, as well as giving us some really great tips on how to engage with foundations and what to sort of think about before we make these connections. As you know, post-secondary, always looking for funding. We always want to expand our programs or seek support in various areas. So I think it's been very helpful. As I said in the chat earlier, I will be posting this and I put the link there, as well as Anna has agreed to send me her presentation. So I'll post both of those things soon. And I just glad everybody is able to join us today as well. 2 things. We have 2 events coming up, and that's our Teach CTE Summit, which is June 27 to 29 in St. Paul. And post-secondary will have a place there. Our initiative focuses on teacher recruitment and retention, but that we have issues across the span with that. So post-secondary will have representation at that event, as well as we're having our second annual post-secondary CTE summit, which is going to be September 20th to 22nd in Denver, Colorado. So I'm definitely very excited about that. And I hope that you can join us. Once again, if you have any needs for professional development, technical assistance, please do reach out to me so that we can see how we can support you. And if there are other topics that you would like to see in these webinars or in other formats, please let me know and we'll work on moving that forward. So I just want to say thanks again, Anna. Thanks for your time. And I thank everyone for coming and meeting here with us. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Great meeting you.
Thank you.
Sophia, do you have a minute?
Of course.